This is Gaza Under Attack, coming to you from the British capital, London. I'm Saeed Pourreza, with you for some of the biggest talking points coming out of the 50 days of the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip and its ongoing incursions in the West Bank. A sixth group of Palestinian prisoners have returned to their homes after being freed from Israeli detention. In exchange, Hamas has handed over 16 captives held in Gaza to the Red Cross. Over the past 6 days, 210 Palestinians have been freed from Israeli prisons in exchange for 74 Israelis and 26 foreign nationals held captive in Gaza. The deal has also allowed in some much-needed humanitarian aid into the territory. The World Food Program says the number of trucks entering the coastal enclave is, quote, woefully inadequate. The World Health Organization has warned that more people in Gaza could die from disease than they did in 50 days of Israeli shelling. The Israeli army has intensified raids and arrests across the occupied West Bank since October the 7th, killing more than 240 Palestinians, wounding over 3,000, and arresting another 3,260. Why can Israel kill with impunity and continue its military occupation for decades? And how the UK's diplomatic and military support for the Israeli regime and a thriving arms trade make it complicit in the oppression of Palestinians. Let's discuss all of that with my guests here in the studio with me, NHS surgeon and consultant Ranjit Brar, a committed anti-imperialist who has written and spoken on the subject extensively. Over the weekend, Dr. Brar found himself arrested by British police at a rally for his pro-Palestinian views. His account of what happened in his words later on. My other guest, who is joining us via Skype from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, is Professor Abdul Sharif. He is a professor of history in Zanzibar. Well, welcome to you both. And Ranjit, let me start with you. First question, the humanitarian pause. Your reaction and expectations?
Said, thanks for having me with you. I am skeptical that we're seeing the end of the situation in Palestine that has led to all the violence. What we always see in our own media is a false depiction of the narrative. So, if you like, it starts, all of the picture in our current media starts with that act of resistance. But it's not shown as an act of resistance, it's showed as an unjustified, premeditated, cold-blooded act of murder. Mm-hmm. We're told it's an act of genocide, the largest killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Yeah. And it totally takes it out of context. Doesn't look back at the entire history of the colonization and occupation of the Palestinian people, of the systematic destruction of their rights. I've been active in the cause of Palestine as an oppressed people who are living under an apartheid regime with, decreased rights, who have suffered imprisonment, brutalization, occupation, actually going back all the way at least to 1948, the Nakba, the original act of terrorism, committed by the founders of the Israeli state, when they went to Deir Yassin and other villages and massacred thousands of Palestinians and used the terror that created in the hearts of the Palestinian people to displace 800,000 people from their homes. It's off the back of this original crime and genocide.
Many of whom live in the Gaza Strip, by the way.
Who live in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So that's where the situation came from. And there's a systematic, writing out of the real history in order to look at this as a one brutal act. More than that, if you actually look at the narrative of that event as it's unfolding, these 1,400 that were initially said to have died in the onslaught, we're finding it's not 1,400, and we're finding more than that, and most of them died because of actually the actions of the IDF, who seem to have would rather kill their own civilians than have them taken hostage. So without looking at the whole situation, rather than just an exchange of individual prisoners, though there's a 3-to-1 ratio, it's not going to be a lasting end, though we clearly welcome the temporary cessation of what's by any standards been a horrendous genocide inflicted by the Israel, with the full backing of my government and the United States government and the EU against the really peace-loving and much oppressed population of Palestine, especially Gaza.
Let me kind of put the same question to the professor.
Yes, and in fact, the irony of it, that every time there is an extension, a number of the detained people who are released by Hamas. But I think I've been noticing that almost every day, as many people are arrested in the West Bank and put in prison again. So in fact, at the end of this whole period, we'll find that the number of Palestinians who are in prison, in Israeli prisons, will be as many as when we started. So we don't really seem to have accomplished much in terms of getting the people out. I think the stoppage of the war itself, at least it has given some time for the people to recover their breath, to find out something, some peace, a few more hours of sleep, but not as much food actually as they need and all the other resources. So it is the oppression still continues even while these negotiations are going on. But what I find actually that ironically probably for the Israelis, that while this has been going on, the public opinion worldwide also has begun to change against them. And I think each time that this kind of action that has appeared, has happened, that Israel continues to lose support, even in those areas where they used to count, like Europe or England or the US. Now you find every day there are really massive demonstrations. All the way I had today from New Zealand, tomorrow in Australia. So there is a worldwide movement that is actually pointing out where the problem lies.
Absolutely. Dr. Brar, putting your medical hat on, what would be the conditions of the survivors of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who have been forced to move to the south, of course, all along being bombed by the Israeli regime's military? What are your concerns from a medical standpoint for those people?
It really is very hard to talk about this without becoming emotional if you've seen any of the scenes. The scenes are horrendous and horrific, and they're entirely by design. There's nothing accidental in it. And it really reveals a very cold-hearted and calculated approach of the Israeli state towards the Palestinian people, who really regard the Palestinian population and their Arab neighbors as untermensch, as subhuman, as not deserving equal rights. The Israeli foreign minister, was prominently broadcast on the world press on the 8th of October, saying that they are dealing in Gaza and in Palestine with human animals, and we will treat them as such. We will cut off their food. We will cut off their water. We will cut off their fuel and electricity. We will cut off their medical supplies. They bombed civilian apartment blocks, totally destroying them. They bombed hospitals.
With the full backing of their Western allies.
Full backing of I don't know any other instance of any other war where the belligerent party can bomb a hospital, where there are women and children in their hundreds and thousands sheltering, kill them to the point that they're dismembered body part. I mean, I'm sorry to say it. It's horrible to say, but these are facts.
I've seen the images.
Yeah, dismembered body parts, severed limbs of children and women lying all over the hospital. I've seen the footage of the bomb. It's clearly like a bunker-busting bomb. It's a JDAM bomb. It's a US bomb. So only the Israeli army have that. So there's no doubt or equivalence about who is responsible for this atrocity. And yet, what's the Western response? The leaders of the free world, as they call themselves, lined up. They're not just lined up, they flew emergency to Tel Aviv to stand with the perpetrator of these massacres, to stand with the genocide and say, we want you to win. That was the words of Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, my Prime Minister, apparently. I didn't vote for him, no one voted for him, but he's our Prime Minister.
Benjamin Netanyahu, didn't he?
He said it to Benjamin, that we want you to win. And also, we feel very bad about the deaths, but we don't know who's responsible. And our own press say it, and they do it whilst pretending, maintaining a charade. The BBC is particularly good at this, maintaining a charade of, impartiality, objectivity, standing above it all. They'll show you a picture of chaos and violence and then talk about the genocide against the Jews. They will never show you the crimes that are perpetrated against. But just speaking from the medical point of view, I do know people. I know people who are working in Palestine, who have worked in Palestine, and the conditions are appalling. They're operating and finding that they're running out of supplies, running out of anesthetic, unable to sterilize instruments, running out of painkillers, having to perform operations without painkillers. It is a tremendously traumatizing. People go through it, and they, the Palestinian people are perhaps the most traumatized people mentally and physically on earth because of their history and the current things that they're going through. But their incredible resilience comes from an incredible spirit and will not to be defeated by the crimes inflicted upon them. And the medical personnel are deeply inspired and moved by that dignity and heroism, by the everyday courage of the Palestinian people. And for that reason, they find the internal strength to go on. But they suffer a lot from burnout. And of course, there are no shortage of Palestinian doctors. Yeah. It's the conditions under which they work, which are deliberately manufactured that make it so difficult for them to do their work.
The threat of disease, waterborne and other diseases, loom large. We will put that BBC bias on display a little bit later on. But for now, let's hear from a country in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has joined other Arab ministers in urging the United Nations to end the conflict in Gaza.
Thank you all for being here. When we last were here at the UN Security Council at the invitation of Brazil, we asked the Security Council to live up to its responsibilities and take a position on the conflict in Gaza. Since then, we have had UN Security Council Resolution 2712 calling for pauses and the release of hostages and the entrance of aid. Unfortunately, that Security Council resolution has not been fully implemented, and for that reason we are here again to call on the Security Council to live up to its responsibilities.
All right, let's continue the conversation here with my guest in the studio and on Skype. Professor Abdul Sharif, what are we to make of the Saudi representative's comments there?
I'm quite happy that he has come out to show that kind of unity. That at the beginning we were not quite sure where we are all going together, but this is a very clear call, and I agree entirely that these pauses, this is really giving in to the demands of Netanyahu. We need permanent peace, ceasefire for good. I think they have killed enough, and they are still continuing to arrest so many people on the West Bank. That also should stop. And then we should go immediately towards a more permanent solution to this issue. Because I think this issue, at least some years ago, now we were talking about two-state solution and doing all that, and yet it just seems to have come to nothing so far. And I think this time, we cannot say really, we hope United Nations can come out. It is not able to take that kind of actions, not because there is no world support for it. I think right now, if there was an open vote throughout the world, I think a vast majority of people will vote for a permanent peace there. We've had enough of killings. The only thing is that...
Sorry, just a quick question. Are we to really take the Saudis seriously? Simply because they were on the verge of normalizing with Israel right up to the October 7th surprise attack on Israel by the Hamas resistance forces.
Well, I would hope that actually the invasion itself has probably shaken the base on which these countries were beginning to try to normalize. Mm-hmm. Because you begin to normalize relations with a brutal state like Israel without any really ground for it. Mm-hmm. Now I think this has exposed them. And I hope that both Saudi Arabia and other countries that have begun to normalize under this flamboyant kind of title of Abrahamic. There was nothing Abrahamic about this one. They were really trying to use the opportunity to grab more and more of Arab lands. So I hope that Saudi Arabia and others will live up to the kind of stand that they are taking now, and that we should all begin to combine. I think when the Arab and Islamic countries came together, we know that there will be a variety of opinions there. But the fact that they came out and had one voice, I think in some ways will at least shake the confidence that the Israelis have had that they can divide the rest of the world.
The people are united, of course. It's now up to the governments to come together and create change on the ground. Let me move on to Dr. Barar for this next question. And you know all too well the cost of advocating for the Palestinian cause. Tell us briefly what happened to you over the weekend.
Thanks, Said. Well, I don't want to make too much of a big deal about it. I'm not a martyr. I haven't put my life on the line. I'm not suffering in the way that the people of Palestine are suffering. However, it's interesting to note our government and its handling of the really mass sympathy that there is in Britain for the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. I've been involved in campaigning for the rights of the Palestinian people most of my life. My father was an activist who worked amongst the Indian community, and it was written on the Indian Workers Association, was the organization that he led, as part of their constitution, that they were advocates against apartheid South Africa and for the rights of the Palestinian people against apartheid Zionist Israel. This has been going on a long time. Partly, I think that's social media spreading the images which are heartbreaking and irresistible, but it threatens our government. Why does it threaten our government? Because, their actions are divorced from their words. Everywhere our government, Tony Blair, when he went into Iraq, said he was doing it for human rights and democracy. Mm-hmm. That was his words.
On a lie.
It was a lie.
Yeah.
But the action, and to protect us from imminent attack. But the reality was he was doing it for oil, for wealth, to protect the interests of billionaires, to protect the interests of capitalists, the same people who actually crush the rights of normal British workers. Mm-hmm. At the moment, we're living through a cost of living crisis. There are 13.5 million Britons who are facing a life in absolute poverty. People who can't feed their children. Children are going to school hungry. People are angry. And they're seeing the lies more generally.
And we also see the attack on people's right to protest, to go on strike, and all the rest.
That's absolutely right. And so our government feel that they have to protect the narrative more than they have to protect the people. They have to protect the lie that helps them to keep the people in check. And so they've been very aggressive towards this government. If you look at our former Home Secretary, Braverman, someone of Indian origin, someone you might think might be progressive, someone who might have experienced racism or oppression in her life, but apparently not. She's absolutely rabid in her defense of Israel, in her, appeals really to the police to crack down on the demonstrators. And that's been a very consistent theme, her labeling of people who speak out as hate marchers, her encouragement to label anyone who would speak out against Zionism as being anti-Semitic. The narrative that anti-Semitism in this country is increasing tenfold, 100. These are lies. Anti-Semitism doesn't really exist as a strong individual force. If you mean anti-Semitism means hostility or racism towards Jews, no one holds that in their heart in this country. But if you mean campaigning against the state of Israel for its documented crimes, for its genocide, that is a humanitarian, socialist, just. If you're a libertarian, if you seek truth, justice, and humanity, you cannot but speak out against Israel. But our government is deliberately, just as they did with Jeremy Corbyn, conflating support of the Palestinian people, opposition to the war crimes of Israel, as being racist. And actually, that's what they're doing. They're trying to criminalize and intimidate the entire movement. And to an extent, to beat it off the streets. But the marches have been so powerful. If you have 1 million people, as we did on the 11th of 11th, despite all of the hostility from Suella Braverman, all of the intimidation tactics, all the mobilization of the far right that she deliberately indulged in, 1 million people came out. They're not a million Muslims, they're not a million Arabs, they're a million British workers. They came out to defend Palestine, and you can't easily attack a million people, no matter how, and they had a lot of riot police out. I mean, riot police were in rows down every street, but you can't attack a million people. So they want to find a way to pick off people, discriminate against them, show the force of the law, show the consequences. You could lose your job, you could lose your profession, you can lose your right to earn income, you can be debanked, deplatformed, become a non-person, be ostracized, be outed as racist. These are things that people are genuinely afraid of, particularly when earning your living at this time is hard. And this is what they're doing to try and sap the solidarity of the British people with the people of Palestine.
Still, the turnout was massive every single time. I'm going to go back to the UK support for Israel later, but for now, let's bring you up to date on what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been saying. He has told the Security Council, quote, "We need a true humanitarian ceasefire." The UN chief said Resolution 2712 was approved in the context of widespread death and wholesale destruction unleashed by the conflict in Gaza and Israel. Guterres stressed the inviolability of United Nations facilities, which today are sheltering more than 1 million civilians seeking protection under the UN flag. Here is more of that address.
We believe we need a true humanitarian ceasefire. And we must ensure the people of the region finally have a horizon of hope by moving in a determined and irreversible way towards establishing a two-state solution on the basis of United Nations resolutions and international law, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. Failure will condemn the Palestinians, Israelis, the region and the world to a never-ending cycle of death and destruction. Let me put it plainly. Civilians, including United Nations personnel, must be protected. Civilian objects, including hospitals, must be protected. UN facilities must not be hit. International humanitarian law must be respected by all parties to the conflict at all times. In a matter of weeks, a far greater number of children have been killed by Israeli military operations in Gaza than the total number of children killed during any year by any party to a conflict since I've been Secretary General.
Life coach and media personality Fahima Mohammed has been keeping a firm eye on the media's coverage of the Israeli bombardment of Palestinians in Gaza. Fahima, thank you for joining me here on this sofa, starting with the UK government pretending history began on October 7th.
Well, that is the same old narrative and story that we're hearing again and again, and even after all this time, we have Government Minister Steve Barclay saying that there is no fault on anyone but Hamas, even with the atrocities that are up till today. So we'll hear what he has to say quickly.
Wow.
I think the people putting the citizens of Gaza at most risk is Hamas. It's Hamas that have used the citizens as human shields. It's Hamas that launched the most appalling atrocity on the people of Israel, and it's important that Israel is able to respond.
Environment Secretary Steve Barclay.
Yes, again, taking away any accountability, any responsibility, also the fact that, not abiding by international law or any sort of humanitarian sort of crisis that is out there is completely disregarded and ignored again and again.
The murder of Palestinians in the West Bank is ongoing.
It's continuous, absolutely continuous, as we see with our next story that's coming up. We have an Israeli army has killed 2 Palestinian children in Jenin in the occupied West Bank. An 8-year-old shot in the head and a 15-year-old shot in the chest. And obviously these children are unarmed. If they go anywhere, it's mainly with stones or something, if that is the case. But even still, they are children.
They absolutely
doing
are.
whatever it wants to in that area. In terms of those 2 kids that were killed, we've got their names. I'd like to read them for you now. Adam Al-Ghul was 8 years old, shot in the head. Basil Abu Al-Wafa, 15, shot in the chest. And the videos that we can't show you show them pretty much being gunned down in the street, being left there to bleed out. These young boys in these communities, when you speak to them, those people living in these refugee camps, second, third, fourth generation refugees.
I saw one of the videos.
Yes, there's
the
quite a
boy
few.
being shot in the head. I think that's
Yes.
the one I saw. It's horrific.
It's completely unimaginable. We cannot even comprehend it. There's nowhere in the world that this would actually take place and be seen and not be heard. And again, there's nothing that's been done. And these are the kind of ministers and from across the globe that is not actually saying much about this.
So we heard what the UK government had to say. You took us back to the West Bank and we saw the horrors there.
Yeah.
And then the
Back
media
to
here,
the
the
media.
BBC, the public broadcaster,
Yes.
literally becoming a mouthpiece of the Israeli government.
Absolutely, absolutely. We hear it again and again. We've had a little bit of, pushback, with regards to at least having some sort of, impartiality every now and again. But again, when we have the next piece of Bushra Khalidi from Oxfam speaking, we'll hear what
From
the
Ramallah.
what the BBC reporter actually questions her and challenges her as well.
We need an end to the siege on Gaza and an end to the occupation and accountability. Perpetrators of violence, all perpetrators of violence should be held accountable for war crimes.
Bushra, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, this is obviously a very personal, difficult situation for you and your family. And as you would understand as well, Israel would say, well, they can't live next door to Hamas, which is,
I would disagree. I have many Israeli friends and we work with Israeli partners who actually disagree with that. And I think that there is a huge portion of population in Israel.
Well, yeah, she continues and she does say, at least she did actually, challenge the presenter back.
Yeah.
And actually even saying that that's not true because even Hamas doesn't exist outside of Gaza, but, there is so much of the settlements there that are being just, taken over, destroyed, and it's nothing to do with Hamas and not being able to live with that. It's the occupation. And that's the real reason. And they still don't want to recognize that.
That's despite her saying accountability for all.
Yeah, they don't want to take accountability.
They don't. Fahima, thanks for now. We'll hear more from you a little bit later.
Sure.
Time now for the social media segment, and Latifa Abu Chakra joins me here with her selection of stories for this segment. Latifa, starting with the Palestinians who have been released by Israel and the thousands more who are still languishing in Israeli detention.
This is a new scenario where Israel has taken hostages from the population of the occupied territories. We know for a fact that there has been over 3,300 new people that have been taken hostage, most of them children, and some of them women, and they have been beaten and tortured. I don't want to say too much. Let's watch the video.
And they have arrested more Palestinians than they have released over the past few days.
Exactly. Something really key to note. Not just that, they have made it a condition upon the release of these prisoners that if they are seen celebrating with their families, that they will be attacked and that they will be killed. And as we saw in that last couple of seconds of that clip, where that man was, he had been shot on sight, waiting to greet a family member who had been released from prison. So just imagine the horror of that particular family waiting upon, their greatest happiness during such horrible times, to then lose a member of their family to be martyred at the hands of the Israelis. It is, Israel continues to murder with impunity.
Many are imprisoned. Many others are being shot dead by Israeli troops, armed settlers, and some live to tell the tale.
The video that we're just about to have a look at is an incredibly sad story, but again, with all stories of Palestinians, it is also a story of resilience and strength and fighting against the odds of a young boy who was shot 30 times in the head and was able to survive.
That's incredible.
أنا اليوم إنه كنت ضمن الصفقة هاي طبعا، فأجوا يعني رنوا على أمي حكوا لها ابنك طالع هيك، فأجوا هون على المستشفى وفكوا الساعة الإلكترونية. أنا كنت متفائل إنه من الدفعة الأولى أنا وشو اسمها أيوة سراج عبيس.
So from here what you can see is that that boy's skull has been severely damaged and they've had to...
Disfigured.
Yeah, absolutely.
30 gunshots in the head and hip, and all he had done was go out to buy bread 3 months ago. Horrific.
So this was prior to October the 7th.
Exactly.
So this wasn't even a retaliation to the to the resistance. This is just an everyday situation that happens in apartheid, genocidal Israel.
An everyday Palestinian experience at the hands of apartheid Israel.
And also he's a child, you know, let's remind ourselves of that. He's one of the youngest people to be released, and he has suffered one of the gravest injuries, permanent injuries to his body. Imagine.
Exactly. An intensification of the Israeli military violence in the occupied East Jerusalem, in Jenin especially.
Absolutely. We know that with the Jenin brigades, who, you know, heroically were started this movement a few months ago, where they were resisting the occupation in such creative and innovative ways. You know, that we received the martyrdom of Ibrahim al-Nabulsi, who became a symbol of the Jenin Brigade. We now know that Israel understands that the resistance isn't just in Gaza. The resistance exists wherever Palestinians exist, across Palestine. And they are preempting, you know, something happening elsewhere. And so to avoid that success of the resistance, they are making sure to attack infrastructures, as you said, in other areas of occupied Palestine. Let's have a look. Since October 7th was that ambulances were unable to get to and from critical areas, hospitals, attack zones. And what they're doing now in the occupied territories in Jenin is that they're making sure to create similar situations so that the Palestinians are crippled and are unable to be self-sufficient and look after themselves and get from one place to another. And they think that this will stop us. They think that this will stop the resistance. They will see that they are wrong.
They will see. And you spoke of the damage to infrastructure, the impact that the shattered healthcare in the Gaza Strip and the sanitation systems there could potentially have on the population.
It's been, what, 50 days, close to 50 days, if not more now, that Gaza has been without, you know, adequate aid and water and electricity and just resources that will help to keep themselves clean. They are unable to collect dead bodies from under the rubble. Disease, of course, is going to be rife. You know, if yesterday and a few days ago, we've seen that bodies are decomposing on hospital beds somewhere that's supposed to be clean and ready for treatment of other patients. So of course, infection will be on the rise. We've seen images of children with maggots, living children with maggots inside live wounds because there is no antiseptic. There is nothing that is available there to clean and sterilize these wounds. So of course, disease is rife, and there is a video that was circulating yesterday that I thought documented this in well enough for us to show the audience.
Okay, let's have a look.
يعني أنا كحكيمة أنا بقدر أشوفها إنه في عنا أمراض زي الإسهال والنتج والحرارة مش بس بين الأطفال وكبار السن والحوامل والسيدات، في كمان أمراض المعدية، في أمراض جلدية، في أمراض، في حكة بين الناس.
يعني لا في حمامات زي الناس ولا في، يعني الوضع مأساوي وفيش، يعني وفيش نقص في المية يعني، وبنروح الحمامات مليانة وطافحة. يعني أنا ما حاطة اهتمام في نرجع لدورنا، يعني إيش بدنا نسوي هنا نقعد يعني.
بعدين احنا بنعاني من ايش؟ من قلة النظافة، الأطفال هذه عندهم مغص وسهال، احنا الكبار عندنا نفس المعاناة، مغص وسهال من الأكل اللي بناكله.
The video says it all in the subtitles there. It's a powder keg waiting to explode.
I don't know how much longer this situation can continue before, you know, Israel will use this as an excuse to be like, oh, it's a hotbed of disease. We're just going to need to nuke everyone there, but, you know, to get rid of these mutant diseases that are just, you know, piling up on top of each other. But also the inhumanity of these people having to decide what to do with this water, whether to drink it or to use it to wash themselves. What about women who are giving birth? What about children who need to bathe? What about, you know, women on their menses that need to, like, what about salah? What about prayer and to do ablution? It's just
horrific. That's for sure. Latifa, thanks for now. Thanks very much. And Latifa will be back in the hot seat with more tomorrow. Let's continue with the rest of the program. The victory in this war on Gaza, without any doubt, belongs to the Palestinian people. Earlier, we spoke to Dr. Zakaria Abbas, a medical doctor and an activist based in Bangalore, India, who told us how from children in Iraq to doctors in India, people have been brought together in humanity to support the Palestinian liberation.
I had just been to Iraq last week, and I saw these little school children in Bain al-Haramain with a huge banner saying, "What is their mistake?" We had children of an oppressed nation like Iraq standing up for the oppressed nation of Palestine. You know, this is a welcoming initiative where children need to be encouraged, they need to be taught, and they need to be educated. It has been so heartbreaking to see so many children being killed. Today, we have people who call themselves human beings, but doing the most inhumane acts. Over 8,000 children have been killed, with the death toll crossing the last Nakba, and also the displaced people, which are 3 times more than the previous Nakba. We have nearly 2.5 million people displaced today. I think the Islamic unity is the key to salvation for the cause of Palestine. And we need to wake up, and also people in India are coming out on streets. However, because of the government restriction, we are not able to champion this cause as well, because everything comes down to the politics, the political relations, and the political connection. However, people are waking up. And yes, there is a lot of hope still remaining in this world. We have been following Doctors Without Borders very, very closely. And hats off to the organization. They are not holding themselves back from revealing the truths. We see continuous statements coming from Doctors Without Borders. And so many doctors, nurses have been killed. You know, the heartbreaking story of a doctor who's been working 24/7, and he comes to know that his family has been bombed. And today, you know, it was like a 24/7 live telecast we've been following, where we get updates saying, you know, the fuel is getting over, electricity is getting over, the ventilators are off. And, you know, I'm an intensivist. I've been working in critical care medicine, and I know the importance of a ventilator. Ventilator support is a life-saving initiative. However, when ventilator doesn't work, the patient does not survive. And when critical care, now the triad system comes in, where the doctors get to choose who gets to live. We have reached that situation. The Indian medical fraternity is absolutely heartbroken, but we feel helpless. All we can do is probably with innovative medical advances like telemedicine, teleconsultation, we are absolutely open to help them. But, our help is restricted for various reasons.
Dr. Abbas also said the recent Israeli onslaught on Gaza is different from all the previous ones because people have now woken up all around the world and can tell you who the oppressors are and who is being oppressed.
We are the lucky ones who were aware of the Palestinian cause from the last few decades, but those who've been sleeping the last few decades have woken up strongly. It's not just about the Muslims, it's a human issue. It's not a Muslim issue. It's about an innocent life who's being punished for no fault of theirs. I have a lot of my Hindu friends, Christian friends, and from people from across all backgrounds coming out in support to the Palestinian cause. However, the Western media is trying their best to suppress the truth, but people of today's day and age are smart to do their own research. This situation is unlike the previous situations in Palestine. Hopefully, with this, there is a change, there is a positive outcome, and people wake up even more and not just talk. They convert their words into action, and we can see that happening. And the power of protest, the power of silent marches is making a difference today, where the United Nations is being so vocal like never before. And we have so many, the pressure on the governments through silent marches has been incredible. I just appeal to my dear brothers and sisters to keep the momentum going. We are the change. We are the future stars of our nation. What's happening in Palestine can happen anywhere in this world. So let us not be ignorant saying it's Palestine, we're in India, or we're in Canada, or we're in UK. However, it's the cause of humanity, and we need to wake up.
You're watching Gaza Under Attack. I'm in conversation with my guest, Ranjit Barar, here in the studio with me, and Professor Abdul Sharif. Thank you for sticking around, both of you. Let me continue with Professor Abdul Sharif. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is doing the diplomatic rounds, but by all accounts, the U.S. are chief arsonist in this regional fire, surely.
I think in some ways, I do not know whether the U.S. is incurable from this disease of automatic support for Israel. Although it has begun to backfire all over the world, and that has begun to worry them. And I think that is sort of good because initially they were talking very openly about sending money as much as the Israelis asked for and so on. And now they're beginning to soft pedal and trying to appear to be more neutral and so on. But we cannot really count on them. They are the big powers who have been used to ruling the world, and they are actually beginning to lose that kind of hold over the rest of the world. And I think it is for us to really continue to be more independent. And here I must say that I'm happy how the Muslims and the Arabs and the other communities sort of came together. And I think actually we should also be quite clear is that it's no longer actually defined by religion or race. That this time people have really gone beyond it, that this is a human question. And they have taken really very strong position on that. And what actually I was quite happy to see at a very early stage, that you begin to get these people, say, Jews, who said, "Not in my name." And I think that is really a major development. I do not know whether I have ever seen that kind of open expression. People, they've always been sort of liberal Jews, and I've known them myself during my lifetime. But this time coming out so openly in large numbers, declaring it openly. And I think actually that should also teach us that this is not a religious or a racial one, but it is a human question. And in the human question, the whole world is actually should be our field.
Exactly, just like you say, the massive number of people who turned out under the streets of London over the past 7 weeks. Everyone you talk to would tell you that at the end of the day, this is a humanitarian issue, just like you said. But moving on to the next segment of the program, which will take us back to the UN, Riyad al-Maliki, the Palestinian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, has addressed the Security Council and asked the global community to keep the pressure on to achieve a permanent ceasefire. He told the Council Israel keeps giving examples from the Second World War to justify its crimes, ignoring that it is the very horror that occurred then that led humanity to enact the fundamental rules Israel is breaching now. Here is more.
We thank Qatar and Egypt for their efforts that led to a truce. But the truce must become a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire. The massacres cannot be allowed to resume. This is not a war. This is a carnage that nothing and no one can justify. It must be brought to an end. The momentum we are finally witnessing now must be sustained. Families must be reunited in life, not in death. The dire needs of our people in Gaza must be addressed throughout the Gaza Strip without further delay and constraints. People must be allowed to go back to their homes and start rebuilding their lives. The siege imposed by Israel must be lifted.
Fahima Mohammed is back with the follow-up to her first offering of Palestine in the media. And Fahima, across the pond in the United States, this unmitigated, all-encompassing U.S. support, as we heard the professor say, for Israel.
Yeah, this sort of post shows the U.S. House of Representatives passing the resolution equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. But we did actually hear that even, which we reported maybe a few weeks ago, France doing the same thing. So it's not just across the pond, it's coming into Europe. And at the end of the day, there needs to be clear definitions because Jewish and the state and the movement is very, very different. Mm-hmm. So they are trying to equate the both, and it's quite alarming as to, you know, how this is now being a very fine and thin line between the both.
Which basically means if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
To your other story, how are the mediation efforts in Doha, Qatar going?
Well, you know, we've seen a bit of this before, obviously, just recently with regards to the Arab Summit. And they were actually called to place sanctions against Israel. But a lot of talk is done, as we've seen before, and we're going to see now in the next video. But unfortunately, the action is not just the speech. It's the actual, you know, things that they could do to actually make a difference. Mm-hmm. So there's no point just saying what they're saying. Mm-hmm. So we'll hear what he has to say again.
Removing that weight, and that is very easy by stopping the killing, by stopping the blockade, by allowing enough humanitarian aid to go in to support the Palestinians. The Palestinians do not want to leave their land, and we are not going to encourage them or force them to leave their land, and we're not going to work with anyone who has that agenda. The Palestinians have a right to their land, and they have a right to live in safety and security.
Again, it's just a lot of lip service, saying the right things, but they actually do have the power in a lot of ways to make it very difficult for what they're saying to actually continue, but nothing of action is actually being, you know, put.
Fahima, thank you. We'll hear more from you tomorrow. All right, let's move on with the conversation with my guest. I'll put this next question to Professor Abdul Sharif, and that is, how do you think Israel's international reputation has fared in light of the recent hostilities? Can they still weaponize their victimhood as they have over the course of decades?
Well, I think they cannot really use as much. I think for the first time, probably than many other wars, that the previous ones that I remember, that I think the brutality of their oppression and the killings and so on, I think it has become more clear this time than ever before. And in some ways, they thought that by showing the kind of force that they could use against the Palestinians, that it would impress the people outside. But I don't think it has done it. It has really turned the stomach of many of the people, seeing And particularly because the hospitals that the other speaker talked about played a very good role. I mean, they did not really play a role. They did their work. They were doing their work. But the kind of work that they were forced to do under those conditions, in a way, has done a lot, probably for the first time that I remember, to turn the opinion of the world against Israel, the violence, because it was all available. And even the Western press that used to be very supportive and trying to hide the ill activities of the Israelis, even they have been forced now to begin to concede, oh yes, this has happened, and so on.
That it is beyond the pale. And it is hope that this will, of course, last, and for us to see a real change on the ground. Final question to Ranjit Brar, and we're fast running out of time. You talked about the UK's diplomatic support and cover for the Israeli regime, but there is more to that, especially the military cooperation between the UK and Israel, which is two-way.
You know, Benjamin Disraeli, an old British Prime Minister and imperialist hawk from the Victorian era, said, "Britain has no permanent allies, only permanent interests." And to understand what's happening in Palestine, as you have to understand what's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and all the rest of these places, you have to understand British imperialism is made up, its ruling class has large capitalist interests. They want to dominate the Middle East because it's a huge source of their revenue, in particular oil. And Israel was a country that they helped to found. After they defeated the Ottoman Empire, after they defeated Turkey, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, they divided the Middle East between them. And they had a question, how do you rule over this territory? How do you rule over it in perpetuity over centuries? As in fact, in a very real way, financially, they have done and continue to do. They implanted Israel. They used the ideology of Zionism. They implanted this idea, this settler colonial population in Palestine, accelerating it from the time of their first mandate, but obviously accelerating from the Second World War onwards. And they continue to give it unfettered and unbridled support because it's one reliable pillar of their rule. Actually, interesting, you're talking about Saudi. Saudi has traditionally been another reliable pillar of their rule, which is why we haven't seen Saudi put sanctions, stop oil to Israel, all of the things it could do to really bring about justice for the Palestinian people. So, you know, Britain and the United States offer Israel support because really they're the ones in control of Israel. Israel is their subordinate state. They use it as a permanent, unsinkable aircraft carrier. And it's a dagger really pointed not only at the Palestinian people, but at the wider Middle East, at all of the Arabic nations and bordering on Israel, and who fought back famously in the 67 and 73 wars, but as yet that campaign is unfinished. Last thing perhaps to say, the CIA predicted 20 years ago that 10 years ago, they predicted Israel would no longer exist in 20 years. If a society continues to make a two-state solution impossible, then they will have a one-state solution, one way or another, and it may not be the way that they intend.
Only time will tell. We're going to have to leave it there. With those comments, we're going to wrap up this show. Many thanks again to my guests, Mr. Ranjit Brar and Professor Abdul Sharif, for their contributions. Gaza Under Attack will be back tomorrow with more. Until then, continue to keep Palestine in your hearts. Thank you.